Welcome to the Music Education Podcast. I'm Chris of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is brought to you by the Soundstorm Music Education Hub. Now, in this conversation, I chat with Jake Williams. Jake is someone who works with electronic music, predominantly within music education. He's got experience of working as an artist and as an educator, and ultimately as an academic as well. So he has a lot of really insightful stuff to say about electronic music and basically different, more original perspectives on sound and how that can fit into music education. It's a fantastic conversation that I'm really happy to share with you.
So there was a whole journal issue which I co-wrote the introduction for, and then in that issue and co-edited, and then in that was an article about my own research,
Cool.
which is sort of the main thing really. And then there was also an interview I did with two other sort of DJ practitioners that was also in that issue. Yeah,
Fantastic. Yeah, I remember reading your one later and getting a bit more into that, but I always struggle with like academic language, and well, maybe it's not even the language sometimes, because it's not essentially just a long list of words that I don't understand. It's just the way that it's written. I find my brain just, I don't know,
switching off.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it's a problem, and it's an interesting point actually that I think we sort of partially address in the introduction to the issue, because the issue is about as the title is Radical Education in Electronic Music, and I guess it came out of discussions. It's edited by me and my and Christopher Horwath, who's the supervisor for my PhD, and it came out of conversations that we were having about electronic music and education, and we were sort of saying that at its inception that there was a lot of things that are quite institutionalized now in higher education in the UK and Europe, as America as well, I think. Were quite radical propositions at one point. The idea that we should use kind of field recordings and electronic music and all of these things. There was education. There's been education happening outside of institutions in quite radical settings, and even the early institutionalization of it was quite a radical proposition and a challenge to more conventional sort of Western classical ways of teaching music. And
it is still radical, though, isn't it? Because from my perspective of going into schools, and you might do something with field recording or looping. I was doing workshops in recently, for example, and putting in elements of field recording to that, and it's really completely alien to most of those educators, I think.
Yes, that's interesting. I suppose talking about the issue is I guess there's a real difference there between schools and universities. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think it's safe to say, and something that the issue's trying to address in a way, is that within higher education, the sort of field of electroacoustic music, or is somewhat established. And has a certain sort of bunch of expectations and parameters that, I think are only really now just sort of being challenged, the boundaries of which are being challenged a bit, where they kind of intersect with kind of, say, dance music and stuff like that. These things have been kept quite discreet for quite a long time.
What do you mean, that sort of more high arty, doing air quotes, bleeps and clicks to a banging dance floor filler, and that sort of have to be kept separate?
Yeah, exactly. And the boundaries of, high art in air quotes is really the point, I think. I think that there's a certain set of, and sometimes sort of somewhat unspoken, sometimes spoken, but like boundaries of what this stuff actually is and what the expectations are. There's actually a little bit in my PhD that talks about this, because whereas a lot, where there's no sort of explicit boundaries a lot of the time, although I have people express the boundaries in explicit terms. Sometimes they're not obvious, but they are obvious when it comes to like a concert presentation, on one of these amazing kind of multi-channel sound systems that they have in a lot of institutions that teach electroacoustic music, and a lot of it's multi-channel audio, and these are amazing skills to learn. But the speaker setups are not designed to replicate heavy rhythmical material, and it's hard to compose anything that has those kind of elements on those systems because they're designed to play sort of acousmatic or electroacoustic music as a genre, which tends not to have repetitive, heavy rhythmical elements to it. It tends to be this kind of electronic music that's sort of grown up in this sort of high art kind of sphere, and that, and whether by design or sort of just by the way things have developed, it excludes a whole bunch of music simply by its speaker design. And I mean, actually, again, where I was studying in Birmingham, where they have the Beast system, this is sort of being addressed, and some of the work that I was doing there was conversations with the sort of facilities people, and I know that they were looking to incorporate other musicians and people who work with electronic music, and there was discussions about how that might be, but it involved a changing to their sound system. They had to bring in reinforced bigger speakers to be able to translate the heavy rhythmical elements of dance music in any successful way. And before, if you don't do that, then it's simply the sound systems that discourage working in that way, aside from anything else, of which there are a bunch of, I think sometimes prejudices, but...
Yeah, why do you think that there is that divide then between that, and what, for want of a better term, but just because that's what gets used, the high art and the more popular? Because especially in the sort of electronic world, I listen and dabble in that realm, and I think of someone like Max Cooper or or most recently Rival Consoles, so popular electronic music, but super. I mean, the degree for all the people who are listening who don't know those people. It's electronic music. It's rhythmic. It'll be like 4/4, but it has an incredible amount of detail and beauty in every single sound. It's not so. Whilst I could see that argument of like the difference between pop music that's maybe lacks dynamic range or detail because it's super compressed and there's a simplicity to it, but then against, like, I don't know, some more detail in maybe something more alternative and rocky, I find it almost quite hard to see the difference between in that electronic realm, because it's textural as well, isn't it? It's like, it's just a perspective of, I'm talking and I don't even know what I'm talking about. Go on.
No, but I mean, you have a point. You have a very strong point. And I mean, I think it's, and it is strange. And I think, again, I think these things are sometimes by design and sometimes just by sort of cultural, institutional sort of ways institutional cultures sort of build up. But, we are, I guess it's very much linked to the whole idea of kind of high art music being different from popular music of various kinds anyway, which, a lot of the times are drawn along racial lines. There's this sort of separation of high art music being different from jazz as well, apart from...
but that's a weird one, isn't it? Because that's become incredibly institutionalized, like an aural music that is now, we must learn all the notes and scales, learn all these songs, and then you can go and then...
Yes. But these things are quite complex. I mean, I guess, there's, I don't know if you know the writer and musician George Lewis, who was part of the AACM in Chicago.
Okay.
And wrote an amazing book about them, a collective of jazz musicians from Chicago, black jazz musicians and he wrote a really interesting piece, a quite influential piece about the sort of avant-garde Western composers such as John Cage and that whole kind of New York scene and their rejection of improvisation, even though that they use lots of techniques, sort of random music techniques, aleatoric techniques and so on, and like to leave things up to chance, but also at the same time rejected improvisation and with sort of, with one kind of deft move kind of removed jazz from the sort of circle of avant-garde composition, and at one point they were the kind of avant-garde, and there was connection to jazz musicians, but there's a sort of, there's moves along the way that kind of other black music sort of all along the way, I think, in avant-garde circles and in Western classical circles, and they're just, and that's sort of tied to the history of colonialism, and colonial sort of mentality, I think, in the sort of high art spheres. So and eventually, also avant-garde spheres,
But in a time that the time that we are now, where institutions are so sort of desperately trying to not be attached to colonialism. In every way possible. No, we don't know. It's terrible.
Yes.
But somehow still retain all those things. Do you think it's that universities are places of academia and articulating artistic things? Essentially, that's kind of what academia to do with music is, really, right? It's like, how can we articulate wonderful, creative, magical, crazy things? And is it because if it's easier to do that with something that's maybe slightly more disconnected? Because I feel so often, higher art things, the avant-garde, say you're talking about the John Cage thing there, and the jazz, the mismatch between the two, where improvisationary jazz would be something that the musicians were deeply connected to and feeling, whereas serialism or something is completely from that. I guess the audience are feeling stuff. They're feeling uncomfortable. And
yes.
What is this? I thought they would be dancing. Is it that?
It's tricky. It's complicated. I'm not sure I entirely get your question. I mean, I sort of...
I don't actually know what you're talking about. What I mean is, like, is this... because we're always weighting those certain types of music much higher. We're holding them up higher. Still in the music curriculum, even though the model music curriculum has progressed quite a lot, there's still a weight to Western classical, and also to there's bits of avant-garde in that. It still seems that that's held up higher. And is that, I guess what I'm saying, is that because it's easier to articulate the components of those things, whereas when we talk about something that's more popular, more raw, it might be more simplistic, but it's more enjoyable, but we can't really articulate in an academic way why.
I think that's a really... Sorry, I'm with you now. Yeah, and I think that is that's a really interesting point, and I'm glad I asked you to clarify it, because I think what there lacks actually is an amount of musicology around. I mean, if we're talking about dance music specifically, there is a sort of lack of musicology around it, and on the whole, dance music's has been written about extensively, but more from sort of cultural, sort of ethnographic sort of perspectives, or even the lens of sort of affect and feeling, and but these are all kind of it's way more often studied through the lens of sort of social parameters than it is actual musicological parameters. Now, there are some musicological texts about DJing and performing with loops and the construction of dance music, but there's way less. It's way less. And I think that's part. I think that definitely plays into it. plays into it a bit. I think that there's a feeling also amongst the people who work in these spheres, again, in the university sense, that they are, that they are the kind of underdogs in a way, right? Like their music just wouldn't, academic electroacoustic music is so niche that it wouldn't survive without kind of institutional funding and
without
support.
that hierarchical sort of
exactly, that it's high art that doesn't have any kind of commercial application or whatever. So,
this is the problem with high art, isn't it? No one likes it. It's like,
I mean,
this is so confusing. This is better, but no one likes it.
I mean, there is a bit of that. Like, I mean, and I think in a sense, they have there is some truth to that. There's like you may think that this stuff has some value, but it just doesn't have. There's not there's not a music business infrastructure to support it, and and that things like dance music are, or anything considered to be popular music have a life outside of the institute, can self-sustaining, and therefore don't need the institutional support. And I think some people are very keen to sort of erect those boundaries for those kind of reasons. I think that falls apart quite quickly if you actually examine it as a claim. For lots of reasons, but I think it's a bad perspective. But anyway, because we're talking about these places are not just sort of art institutions for the proliferation of a certain kind of music; they're educational institutions. So if you hold up, if you sort of hold up something as being high art, where something, whereas techno isn't, or something, then that's deeply problematic, I think, really, actually. But, I mean, on an educational perspective, these places are changing. Like, it's all shifting, it really is. And, there is, it's not like dance music isn't being taught on these courses, but at all. But yeah, I would say that there are, just because of the way these places are built up and the kinds of, they're all been set up, these departments are all set up by musicians who make certain kinds of music and influenced by a certain school. A lot of them went to like EACAM or GRM in Europe, which are sort of like early institutions that were set up for the proliferation of early experimental electronic music.
Ooh,
and
right. That's interesting.
And and then came to the UK and sort of set up music departments to sort of play around with this stuff.
That's interesting. So Europe as a whole was kind of pushing that a little bit.
Yeah, France, but France and Belgium particularly. Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's what happened.
And Germany. Yeah.
Because that's what happens with conservatoires, isn't it? In the sort of Romantic era, where they have, the whole of Europe have this amazing, rich culture of high art, and then Britain have gone, oh my God, we need to have some of that. Let's build it up. Let's build it, and that's happened with electronic music in that way as well.
Yes, yes. Interestingly, actually, when you think about it, in the UK, it was done through, there tends to be I can't quite remember the specific histories of the different institutions, but a lot of them have their sort of roots in radio broadcast studios. They're the first people to get hold of this kit. Were sort of, and we have that history in the UK with the BBC, which was our version of that was the radiophonic workshop. Yeah, that's what it's called, isn't it? Radiophonic workshop. That was sort of Delia, Derbyshire, and people like that. Daphne Oram, I think, was involved. Oh, I need to check that. Please don't put that in if that's wrong. And they did. They were part of the BBC, and they had all the synths, and essentially a research workshop to find out how to make music with synths. So we had our own version of that. It was based in the BBC, and actually, strangely, much more. It was very sort of practical in a way. I mean, they wrote the Doctor Who theme tune amongst other things, you know.
Well, through that program,
they actually came up with they actually made a lot of theme tunes for things while they were just sort of experimenting. So,
messing about with synths.
Yeah. So yeah, we have quite, you know, the history sort of similar but different here. I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, it's just, I guess I think, you know, one of the things that we were sort of trying to address in the issue was these different kind of histories, I suppose. And I guess what's in there as well is not only how education inside academia of electronic music is sort of slightly different from much more informal types outside of academia, that also that the histories in, and there's quite an interesting article about a sort of sound and music course in Brazil that teaches all the sorts of stuff that you might expect from a like music technology course in the UK, because obviously, you know, we have music technology courses and music production courses that are quite separated from this sort of high art version, right? Like they're much more practical. I mean, the sort of courses I teach on, you know, we might teach sort of avant-garde music, but you know, they're much more. That's along with a whole bunch of other things. They're not, you know, they're not sort of electroacoustic music courses.
Trying to show your students the boundary of commercial possibility. It's like, if you go, okay.
But yeah, there's just some interesting articles in there about how things that we would sort of take for granted. I think particularly this one in Brazil, we take for granted. They're actually quite a radical proposition out there, and the university it's taught in has a lot of ties to the community and a sort of quite socialist outlook. And they, you know, so they teach all the stuff that we teach and music technology courses, but it's highly accessible for quite, you know, quite poor people in the area of Brazil where they are, and it's you know, and therefore the sort of output and the ethos of the course is quite different from what we perhaps imagine, which is, I think here the whole, you know, I mean, this is a whole other topic, but the field of music production is a complex one, and it's sort of tied to this idea of the music industry, I think, and you know, which is a whole other set of problems, right? Like, I mean, I find when it comes to education, you know, particularly given the current state of the music industry, whatever that actually means.
What do you mean?
You know?
Not the current state of the music industry, but being tied. Can you explain that a little bit? Sorry.
Well, I think it's just, I mean, I think so. I mean, I have long conversations with this with people I work with, because, you know, I teach on BA and MA programs in music production at two different institutions, and I used to run, and well, it was an electronic music production and performance course at another college previous to that, and then sort of previous to that I worked in just in sort of non-higher education sort of technical teaching of various kinds, like Ableton Live and so on, so just sort of short courses and so on, but then moved into this sort of world. I think now everything's called music production. At one point it was more, the courses were more likely to be called music technology or creative music technology. Now it's sort of music production or creative music production. That seems to be the sort of shift in the trend and what you call these things. And perhaps the focus has shifted to being a bit more holistic in terms of it, you know, being slightly less of a technical focus and more of a sort of holistic, what does a music producer do? And also to accommodate all the different types of music producer that you have. You know, so again, which is attention on these courses. Sometimes attention, sometimes a really productive mix, that both things happen. But you know, there's people, but you're getting much less and less the idea of people who want to be the technician type of producer, who kind of essentially will be looking to possibly make their own music, but also to produce bands, as also taking the engineer role, or to be a kind of programmer for other people in some kind of sense, or a mixing or mastering kind of person. You know, there's a lot. By far, the majority of people who are undertaking these courses make their own music. There's a lot of people who are perhaps singer-songwriters who want to produce their own beats and so on, or produce their own music. whatever, that goes with their songs, even if that does involve bringing in other musicians. I think the focus is moving, is becoming more holistic, the creation of music, the production of music, rather than what we would think of as the technical aspects of that. Which is a good thing, I think. But then it's a little bit about what is a music producer? This sort of raises these questions. Is music production a good title for this? Because the term music production is so tied to the history of the music business, and also that what that term means has shifted so much because of the rise of the sort of beat maker producer who's essentially sort of is an artist, makes instrumental music for people, either just to be played, dance music, or for people to rap or sing on, and that's a completely different set of skills and a completely different sort of job than being a music producer in the classic sense.
It's kind of a yet another sort of artifact left over from the music education world that so often is so disconnected from actual music creation, isn't it? Because that idea of a producer from basically the time of the Beatles, where it's one guy in a suit who comes in and has an overall look and says, no, do this, do that. And then because it's such a fascinating or such an exciting time in music as a whole, I think, isn't it? Where, and you using the word holistic several times, is just perfectly apt to my experiences of how now being a producer, being understanding audio in multiple ways, understanding video production, understanding all those elements, and not just in a that's how you need to be to make it in the music business because you need to make reels now, but just in a way that's how you can be an artist now. You can interact with things in with multiple sort of disciplines, if you like, or things that would have been seen as disciplines, but they're just tools, aren't they? But there's this way of thinking that I would link to a producer, and probably the way that perhaps you think, because of how you're talking now and what I've read, and seeing sound in maybe a completely abstract way, just a textural way, seeing blocks of sound and quality of sound, rather than thinking about music in this, to be frank, Western classical, born out of notation and piano way, which I find it incredible. Actually, I'd very recently come out of sort of about a month and a half of having a break from the podcast itself, because I was feeling I was going slightly insane, because it feels so much of music education is just so detached from that way of thinking. But so many artists that I know and love or meet think in this way of sound being boundless possibilities. The idea of, we were talking about field recording, and actually, I like that quality that's a bit crappy on my iPhone. I like that. And artists think like that. They don't think of necessarily a snare drum has to be a snare drum. It can be, I really like that sound. Am I making sense, Jake?
Yes, you're making absolute sense. And I think that this is something I found interesting going into a school GCSE music environment as part of my research, coming from the higher education. We're talking about all these different sort of distinctions within higher education, but coming from like this kind of more music technology, music production sphere in higher education, where, again, it's even the music theory isn't a prerequisite to do it. Like, people are coming at it with so many different skill sets. But even now, the kind of what perhaps was the focus, the technical sound engineering knowledge, that is now also slightly less of the focus, with more of an artistic kind of viewpoint coming through. And one of the courses I teach is at LCC, which is an art school, and the MA we do there, we take a very, actually BA and MA, we take a very kind of art school approach to it. You can, it's
what you're talking about, sound in a almost a visual art sort of way.
Yeah, well, they have a very well-established sonic arts course, which I think now they have two different strands, like experimental electronic music and sonic arts, but now they also have music production, which I guess the idea is this is for people who have a slightly more... I mean, again, this is where the conversations come up, but I guess the idea is people with a kind of slightly more popular music direction, but whilst also incorporating kind of quite experimental approaches and so on. But you know, these boundaries are pretty fuzzy, right? And then it sort of comes in, you know, I guess I guess within music production, I guess the one focus is like, okay, well, this is about making records of some kind, you know, like you're going to make a album or an EP or a set of singles or just sort of recorded music out in the world. And that's the sort of focus, really, whatever genre that is. But
music that people might like.
Yeah. I don't think people do. I mean, the thing is, people do quite a lot of experimental things on this course as well. So these boundaries are quite hard to define in a way. But there's a certain sort of sense that, you know, one course is right for a certain kind of student and another.
But what was going back to your GCSE experience of going in there? From that perspective. That's all right.
Yeah. That was the point, wasn't it? So coming into the GCSE environment, essentially my PhD is about DJing and about the creative possibilities of digital DJing. And I have quite quickly took my own quite unusual sort of take on that, which was to do with field recording. So my MA was, I got quite interested in field recording at the time of my MA a while ago, as well as more, I've been a DJ since I was a teenager, but more experimental uses of DJ equipment, perhaps. So there was this sort of soundscapey field recording aspect to my work that I was developing as part of my own research. But I was also interested in taking the technology into I did workshops with young people and, all ages, actually. I mean, like quite a wide age range. I was also doing workshops in kind of at more experimental music venues around London as well. But it was actually the school ones that became particularly interesting to me. And I ran two workshops with two groups of year 10 GCSE music students at a school in Tottenham, sort of a year apart. So I got sort of two groups at around the same stage. And I'd done some slightly younger work. I did it, but I was sort of focused on these because I thought it was interesting. And the way that I was teaching, so part of it was like, let's try out field recordings. But that bit actually sort of became, and in some ways I was like, well, this is the point of it. We're doing a kind of soundscapey thing, but we're doing it with DJ equipment. But actually, it quite quickly flipped to be like, well, that's actually perhaps not as important as just seeing what the young people do with the equipment. Let's let them play anything, let them select some music that they want to play, encourage them to make some recordings, but like they were encouraged to make recordings, but whether they used them or not was a totally separate thing. They
make field recordings to
on their
input,
phone,
and then to
use in the
Can you explain that the actual practicalities of how that works and what tech you've used in that for anyone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this was quite an important point as well, because I think there's a perception. So DJing is a potential performance instrument for GCSE music is one point. It hasn't been widely adopted due to a perception that the equipment is expensive. And sort of that there aren't enough tutors around. There is an organisation that at one point sort of tried to they didn't get DJing included in the GCSE, but they did actually write the graded the grades for music.
Okay. Is that the LCM DJ thing? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so they got an organisation called Future DJ. So they did that, and I think as a way of sort of putting it on the map. And they set up an organisation to provide equipment and tutors. But I think then COVID happened, and they quickly they changed to more online sort of activities. But it exists, but there was generally it's not very widely adopted, as is kind of any type of music tech. I think, like for GCSE, like I think if you're at a school that's got a lot of music tech, you're lucky. But for example, the school I was working at, they have a lot of the music department successful, and they do a lot of ensemble playing, but they have no tech.
Is that because they have no money?
They have no money. Yes.
Classic issue.
Yes. Exactly. And I think there's a question of money, and there's also a question of sort of expertise and sort of focus, and amongst the perhaps amongst the staff, or because they're all just really good ensemble players at the school as well. So, but we're keen to try it, and we ran the workshops. But I was just using these kind of like secondhand iPad. I just sort of scraped together some money from my PhD research funding, and a bit actually from one of the universities where I worked at. Actually, I got some seed funding from them as well to buy some cheap iPads and the cheapest possible DJ controller going, which they cost about £100. So I managed to get six of these setups.
Okay.
So that meant with two students sharing headphones, that 12 people could potentially learn. Which sort of, again, that proved to be an issue with schools, is that the classes are bigger than that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why it was focused on music students only rather than the whole group, which I would have liked. But we managed to split the music groups up into two smaller groups, so it would actually work. Numbers wise, but still, that's still a lot more students. It's a lot more accessible price wise, and then the technology itself is a lot more accessible than learning how to mix vinyl or anything like that. It's on an iPad. They're free. It's a free app, which I was keen on.
Which app was it you're using?
So I think maybe at the time I was using Pioneer's free app, which was called We DJ, which may now have been discontinued, but I'm now using for my own work as something called DJ Pro, or DJ DJAY by Algorithm is free, but they have a paid version that has some quite sophisticated features. Okay. But still, most of the functionality is free, so it seemed good because young people could just get it on their phone or on their tablet or whatever.
So if they wanted to.
They could just go and do it. It wasn't like, you don't even need the controller to use it. It's touch screen. Mm-hmm. It's actually got some platters on it. You can just use with your, So it's very sort of tactile. I think it's the iPad version sort of won awards for just being a really good iPad app, right? That's sort of designed very well to work on tablets. Anyway, so that's free. If you wanted to add the controller, they're quite cheap. They're like £120 or something. So relatively cheap compared to the great expense of a more fully fledged kind of DJ setup, for sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so and then we just kind of just let them do whatever they wanted, which was fun. And so they could, because it's on an iPad, it's very easy to load in any digital file that you like, which is one of the great sort of revolution of digital DJing, really. So you can just play anything, right? You don't have to cut it to vinyl or anything to play it, right? So
out of interest, can you work with stream stuff? So you could link up with Spotify or whatever, and it just so I'm now doing sort of peri DJ tutoring in that school for some students who've been doing that for a couple of years now, and that's become quite a key part of it now. Actually, doing these group tutors, we really, if you can get any song that they want on a streaming service, it streamlines the whole process. That's mad, isn't it? So vinyl bags are dead, man. I can literally have any song on earth in seconds. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So, arguably that sort of changes your relationship to the music you're playing and so on, but that's perhaps a whole different thing. But I think, being able to play any file you like, any bit of music you like it makes teaching DJing much easier, for example. And also potentially much more experimental quite quickly, but a part of it was just the way I approached the workshops was simply like, here are the features. I gave them a creative provocation, which was to make some field recordings and pick some bits of music that told some kind of story about the area where they lived. Cool. That was the sort of creative provocation, to tie it to the sort of more soundscape work that I was doing. But I didn't force the issue. I mean, it was just...
What did they do? What did they do?
So some of them used field recording. I mean, a lot of them recorded each other, and there was a lot of the sound of the school in there.
So a lot of fart noises and like...
playing around. And so it was, I mean, that was quite fun, but not everyone used it. Not everyone used them. People picked the songs that they like, quite a bizarre range of music in some ways. But then I think, I think young people's taste can be quite eclectic because of the sort of things that become hits on TikTok, right? So, people bringing in Steely Dan, and you're like, what?
So crazy, isn't it? It's so crazy. It's such a weird time. And then, like, kids saying, I've had it the other day, like, oh, yeah, I've been listening to this really... Like, it's a really old band. You wouldn't know them. It's like, who? Do you know the Dandy Warhols? And it's like, oh man, this is like, it's so strange.
Yeah, so that's kind of funny. And so I think I let them pick some songs. So that before we had the streaming thing set up at that point, so I just downloaded them some songs that they picked, and then they played around them.
Okay.
But it was only we only had a couple of hours with each group. And I think, it was just pretty much, these are what the features of this software are. Do something with it. Yeah. Do something with it. So get from one bit of music or one recording to another, possibly via just do whatever you want. And that very free form way of approaching it was sort of yielded extremely interesting. I mean, for a start, they were extremely engaged. I think the tutors commented, and I think this is a almost literal quote. They said that they'd never seen them as engaged with anything as that they had with a couple of hours. And I think another group got another go as well, and the same thing. They just got stuck in and found lots of features I hadn't even shown them sometimes.
That exploration of technology is just that sort of how we learn, isn't it? I've certainly talked about Ableton earlier, worked it out for myself, and that sort of joy of finding things. And then someone comes along and goes, do you not know you could do that? And you're like, oh, okay, that wasted about an hour of my life, doing... But exploring tech in that way is kind of how young people work. It's how we all work now, isn't it? We just go and feel our way around and then arrive at it. Do you think that's why they were so engaged? Because they were sort of...
I think so. I think there's a number of factors. I don't want to speak for them because I didn't actually ask them, but they, I think that they were very comfortable with the iPad sort of interface and all the rest of it.
And discovery of that sort of feeling. Yeah. Oh, I could do that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, and there was another point, and this had been written about previously, about the potential benefits of having DJing in schools, was that it was an opportunity for them to explore music they actually liked.
Right. Shock horror. So that was the conclusion of someone's PhD. That's
there's a book written about it. There was basically like, I think the particular focus was around teaching young people in the north of England how to DJ with kind of happy hardcore, basically, which was the sort of style they were all into at the time of the research. And that this sort of the validation of happy hardcore in the school environment, but particularly for schools particularly for kids who were not getting a lot of validation and engaging the school, that that this was seen to have like a positive effect, right? And I think I did observe this, although there was an interesting observation that while they had the headphones on, they were trying all kinds of crazy things and working as pairs, and then the moment you asked them to play it out loud, they were a lot more reticent. And I think that there was a nervousness around sharing music taste because it's not something that's normally encouraged in those spaces. And that actually, when I said this to one of the teachers, they were like, we should really just have more sessions where we listen and talk about the kind of music that they bring, so that the sharing of their personal music taste becomes more normalized, I think, because I think there's quite a lot wrapped up around that when you're a teenager. I think there's a bit of nervousness. I think that, there's a bit of nervousness just about performing in front of the group as well with this new thing. So that's something I observed anyway. But.
Interesting. I wonder if that is less now though, because something that I've reflected on many times is that when I was at school, there was a very clear divisions of what was cool to be into and what wasn't cool to be into. Do you know what I mean? There was very much skaters and clubbers.
Yes.
But now that's like not a thing. And you hear that in the music as well, right? Where there's more beats-based stuff shamelessly appearing in something that's more metal or, that kind of mishmash, isn't it?
Yeah, it's less sort of tribal in that sense, isn't it? But I think, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, actually. I don't know. But I just, it was just an observation that there was definitely, there was a nervousness about sharing what they were doing. And, there might just been a nervousness about.
That's just being a teenager as well. Nervous about life.
Yeah. But I mean, I think there was a lot less of a like, listen to this track than you might have thought, you thought there might have been. Mm-hmm. But not exclusively, but.
Cool, man.
But,
go on.
I can't remember. Yeah, no. But I anyway, I mean, so just to go back to the, but then, when I sort of came to write this part of it was like, I mean, there was no, and look at the inclusion of DJing as part of the GCSE performance assessment and what that meant, and some of the claims that have been made for it, including by the people who pushed to make it into graded exams and so on. This is where it became complex, I think, because I could see the absolute value in this, right? And that, and it's affordable, much more affordable and accessible now. There's obvious value to it from the levels of engagement of the students for a bunch of reasons. Then what does it actually mean? And then the suggestion that I would come back and actually teach this as a tutor, as an instrumental tutor, it was which I have done, but there are problems with it. I mean, if you look at the GCSE music assessment, I'm sure you're very aware, it's very restrictive overall. It is true that the inclusion of DJing widens the possibilities for people quite a lot, in terms of the music they can engage with, and provides an outlet for kids who are into dancehall and drill and all the rest of it. But I feel like there's a real tension there, because although sort of maybe great claims were made, including claims of a decolonization of the curriculum and all the rest of it, it's like its inclusion alone in the performance aspect is not enough, because they still have to sit the exam, which is 60% of the mark or something, which they still have to answer a whole bunch of stylistic questions about Bach, and then even when popular music is included, there's quite sort of reductive kind of stylistic questions. I'm not sure how they help anyone, really, to be completely honest with you, but and they certainly I don't they're just sort of seem so arbitrary.
Isn't those questions they're sort of trying to get? They're like, balls. What's the when you read in English, when you read a story and then you have to sort of describe what's happened in the story. It's almost like checking that you are actively listening, isn't it? It's sort of like, can you articulate what you've just heard?
Well, exactly. I think that's the entire GCSE curriculum, full stop, right? It's just an exercise in remembering stuff and then writing down the answers. And the GCSE music exam is no different.
Isn't the problem, Jake, though, like that this... We're trying... that it's not actually compatible. It's not... I know that seems a bit sort of... end of days stuff, but I come across this so often in all these conversations with wonderful people like yourself, that if you are that the measurement of music in this way just isn't really, it doesn't really work. Because I mean, you've obviously picked on GCSE music, which is totally fair play. I mean, I'm not really into it, but actually amongst other sort of curriculums or whatever, it's not hugely backwards. You know, there's steps to make it forward, but actually the way that it works, it's like if you're measuring it, that's that it can't get that good. It can't be, and the way that we measure music is in a colonial way, isn't it? Because it's seeing music in this sort of A to B, it's seeing form and structure in that way. Whereas if we turn up and it's just a feel thing and a vibe thing, then that's not going to be measured well.
Yeah, well, so there is an argument that for all the issues that there are with GCSEs, that they are still have, you know, for assessing people of that age, that they are better than some others, that they're more manageable than sort of systems of kind of ongoing assessment and coursework that they had. So the shift towards the more exam focus, there is a sort of need from that, at least from the point of view of the assessment, that it's sort of imperfect, but there's some reasons why it's there, kind of thing. But I mean, I'm glad you asked that, because the article I ended up writing is a sort of slight provocation, because as I because I'm coming from thinking about teaching music production in this more kind of art schooly way that I now actually do in an art school, but also have been thinking about it in this ways in the other places I've been teaching, is trying to shift. You know, I'd already been very interested in shifting it to a more kind of arts practice than a sort of technical one in my teaching in higher education, that I looked at what the GCSE criteria, even under the new, since 2016, that heavily examined version of GCSEs, what does the exam look like for art and design, right?
Okay.
And it's completely different, and it's the one space where it is much more sort of open to interpretation. You get to give a kind of sort of essentially a rationale, sort of critical rationale for why you've approached it. You're responding to some kind of creative brief, but it could have been like the one that I suggested about making a set around there's something to do with your local area. You know what I mean? It's just like that. They had all of these different kind of creative provocations that were quite open. I mean, there's this sort of weird endurance test where you have to sort of make art for 10 hours in a sort of enclosed room, and that's what you get assessed on. But what you get to do and the criteria for which it's assessed are much broader, and there isn't so much weight on an exam, if there's even one at all. But it certainly isn't the thing. It isn't the thing that's going to make you pass or fail. The thing that's going to make you pass or fail is what you do in this 10-hour creative exercise that's quite open and quite broad, and that trying to draw on various different histories of DJing just to show that, you know, it wouldn't be such a weird thing to do to actually put DJing in an art class rather than a music class.
Okay.
You know, there are historical justification for why you might do that. That why, or at least equally, would have a place there. And that kind of assessment would work much better for DJing. Whereas, like, because if you sort of reduce it to just a set of sort of technical skills. Obviously, I'm not making that this isn't really good for like music anyway, right? Yeah. But like, and then of course the argument is that, well, you should make the music assessment more like the art assessment. It's like, well, yeah, fine, but like, you know, I mean, arguably for something like the saxophone, there is a set of like technical skills that you really need to learn to play the saxophone or whatever it is in up to any kind of standard to be able to do anything interesting with it, right? Mm-hmm. But I think with DJing, like, you can really just press play on the record, and but the art arguably could be in the order of the tunes that you play or the way that you mix them together. And with the digital equipment specifically, you don't any longer need to have the foundational skill of being able to match the beat speed of two, we call beat matching, which is just like being able to align by ear. You know, I mean, people argue, you can argue to death whether that's a useful skill or not. And I think I'd say that there's some argument that it is still a useful skill, but you don't have to do it to make it sound good, right? Like, or not have the beats clash. The software will do it for you. So, you know, but there's a lot of other art in it, the sort of discursiveness of the tunes you pick, the story you try and tell, you know. There's so much that can be done there in looking at it as a sort of audio collage, right? Like there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do taking that angle, and my argument would be that would be a better way of teaching it, and at least from the outset. And then if people want to learn the kind of skills that would get you high marks through technical skill, like, I don't know, sort of beat matching, scratching, kind of, I don't know, sort of things that display some kind of virtuosity, you know, which is the suggestion of the GCSE musical instrument thing, that you display something akin to instrumental.
I guess, to be fair,
skill.
Most of music education, throughout schooling, is pointing towards technical skill as a whole, isn't it? Which is slightly confusing, because technical skill is a very small element of music as we know it, and it works in thresholds as well, right? We can, for different instruments, you've talked about DJing and pressing a button, but even a piano, for example, ding, well, that sounds nice. We can do a lot with that. Maybe we don't need any more technical skill. So isn't there always this problem, though, of where even in the art course way of measuring music, that we still end up with this articulation again of why you did this. This was my intention. This is what I did. Whereas actually, maybe there's just some banging tracks that I've created and people really like it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big question. I mean, again, that comes back to, you know, sort of comes full circle to what we started on when you were asking about the sort of academic nature of the writing and the, you know, in the edited journal issue, and that, you know, and something that commented on there was like one of the barriers of access, you know, to write in an academic journal, you probably have to want to be an academic, because you're not going to get paid, and so why would you want to do it? Well, because there's this perverse kind of incentive in academia where you have to just keep getting published to have a career, to put it in your CV. You know, these are the things you get measured on as an academic, so you kind of just want to keep getting published. So there is an incentive for you to do it if you're an academic, but not if you're not. Right.
Yeah.
You know, which was the point of bringing into interviews for outside practitioners who were we got funding to pay them, by the way. You know, and have their voices in there. But one of the turntablists I interviewed, Maria Chavez, is like, one of the barriers is the way that you have to express yourself over this stuff. It's not that you just make the work, but you have to write about it. And it's not just that you have to write about it. You have to write about it in this very specific way. And that's where the kind of elitism comes in, and the sort of exclusion, because you exclude a bunch of very creative people who just can't write about, or don't have any interest in writing about their music in that way. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. I would also say, though, that if you take a more expansive view of that there's a lot of value to the sort of art schooly kind of training. Right, you know, I don't think it's any accident. Hi. Sorry.
We'll leave that in for a bit of authenticity.
I don't think that it's any kind of accident that, you know, a lot of big pop stars went to art school, right? And the reason isn't because they learned how to write kind of, you know, essays in a particular format that would get published in a journal. The reason is because they learned how to focus their creative intention. They learned how to sort of think critically about what they were doing, you know. And I think perhaps primarily they learned how to focus their creative intention and articulate it, and that had a positive benefit on the kind of music that they were making. And I mean, obviously that's not for everyone. Not every musician would benefit from that kind of training, and also learn, you know, and had to get up in front of people and have them critique their music and have a conversation about it, and also have to and hopefully learn some sort of history of the kind of field that they're
I guess people who are creating, as in rather than people who are training to be session players or orchestral players, who ultimately, there's always this confusing thing in music education as well, where the whole of school music education is focused on creating orchestral players or session players, which is an ever shrinking industry to the point that it almost doesn't exist anymore. But with the things that you're talking about would help people that create, right? Creative musicians. So,
yes, and I guess perhaps that's where the separation between the kind of musician you want to be or the kind of producer you want to be sort of comes.
Yeah, brings that word in again, doesn't it? A producer, a creator.
And that. But I guess my point is that I think that there is value in that. It helped me. Like, all I can say is, and I guess like I kind of fall back on the fact that I made music for years, was in bands and toured and put out records and did all kinds of things, but at a particular, and did commercial music, did production music, did music for TV, did all of this stuff. But at a point in my career where I needed a change, I was sort of sick of doing stuff for Brief and I was sort of a bit out of creative inspiration and needed a change. I went and did a master's. I'd never done an undergraduate, but went and did a master's. It was a music master's, but it was very open and very experimental at Goldsmiths, and it really helped me, and it really set me in a new direction. I learned about a bunch of music that I didn't know about, more experimental and electroacoustic musics of the kind that I was sort of talking about at the beginning. So I didn't know, there's real, I think both sort of schools, they're so intertwined in many ways, but also there's so much that each school can learn from each other, right? I think, in terms of electronic music, there's a lot out there. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot of different cultures around it, of which, which they can all learn from each other, I think. And I certainly learned a lot, learning about that stuff and learning to experiment and learning to focus my creative ideas, and so I found value in it. I think it's sort of historically proven that lots of musicians have found value in it. And so that was kind of my argument around it, really, that really on the whole, that there is value in teaching music technology of all kinds, including DJing. And I think DJing is a particularly interesting one, given it's such a good access point now. The digitalness of it has made it a really good access point because the software's free. Most people, not everyone, but most people have access to some kind of smart device where they could run the app, and that you can just throw sound in it and start playing around with it. Whereas a lot of music production software is quite complicated by comparison. So as just a way of getting in and playing around with sound of music and being creative, it's very, very accessible version. So it seems like a good way in to teach music in this way. And the sort of just the idea of making an audio collage is something I think everyone can kind of get their head around. Whether you have any interest in dance, because it's way wider than having any interest in dance music, which is obviously what everyone associates with DJing, right? But I mean, you can play anything you want, right? Like, it doesn't matter, and I think
you could mix up some Bach and Mozart, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really anything, yeah. And and there's real value in that, and I guess that was the sort of point in my article, that the sort of direction that I tried to take my kind of teaching, and I think that there could be a lot more done with young people in looking at music through those kind of lenses, right?
Amazing, Jake. Done. Thanks so much, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope that was all right, not too rambly.
No, not at all. Well, it was rambly, but it was good. That's the whole idea. It's a podcast of music education rambles, as I should have called it. So, no, it's really fascinating. Thank you.